and various occulturists. Today on Occulture Wars, we are continuing the conversation on Druidry, both historic and living. Today with one of the greats, Murtagh AnDoile. And while I do have him introduce himself on the episode, I wanted to try at least and give an honorable introduction myself, because by the time I had met Murtagh in person some time ago, his reputation had already preceded him as one of the best possible sources one could ask for, and just one of the best people to talk to about just the subject of Druidry, Celtic paganism, and Celtic magic in general. And more than that, he's been always very kind and supportive to me on my own path. So I'm thrilled to speak with him today, and I'm thrilled to try and get this introduction going. So, Tagh has taught countless times over the years at conferences and pagan gatherings on this subject matter, and I thought I would just lift a little bit of the bio I saw on him on the Green Man website. Murtagh AnDoile is a Druid and elder of the Tuatha De Danann, an Irish mystery tradition. He is founder of the TDD, Tuatha De Danann, the Ninth Wave, and Nemid na Morrigan, Grove of the Morrigan. Tagh has been involved in the pagan occult movement since 1968. He's an independent scholar and researcher with a degree in anthropology. He's worked as an archaeologist for Brown University. He's been published in several pagan magazines and newsletters, and was interviewed in Keepers of the Flame, interviews with elders of traditional witchcraft in America. Through talks given in the early 80s at pagan festivals around the country, which we talk a little bit about on this episode, he inadvertently became one of the progenitors of the Celtic Reconstructionist movement. He's been working with an Irish form of magic and witchcraft and the spirits and gods of Ireland since 1977. My only addition here is that he's also the director of the Pagan History Project, which is an oral history project created to collect, store, share, and preserve the history of the American pagan movement, which obviously I find to be crucially important and something that I am definitely trying to do in my own way. So anyways, without further ado, Murtagh is awesome. I was delighted to speak to him on the podcast and hope to have him back on again soon. So without further ado, let's get cracking. I am imagining things today. Okay. Well, I'm going to ask you to just introduce yourself because you can probably do it better than I can.
Okay, well, I go by Murtagh AnDoile. I'm a Druid that works in a primarily Irish Celtic system, although I have some sidelines magically. I've been around the community since about 1968. And at that point, it wasn't a pagan community, it was an occult community. And I've been part of a craft group, a craft tradition that evolved into a early Celtic Recon group and mystery school. We have our own, myself and my wife have our own branch of it here, which is the West Coast branch, which is totally different than the East Coast branch, because and for a while during the 80s and 90s, I was kind of a priest for hire. So I got to work with the Golden Dawn and the OTO, and I got called in as a for a Gardnerian ceremony to be the priest. So I've seen a lot of stuff.
You've made the rounds.
I've made the rounds, yeah.
Well, can I specifically ask you about just Celtic Reconstruction and like your role in relationship to just modern Celtic Recon?
Well, that's an interesting thing. Theoretically, there's one person, Aaron Laurie, who sometimes says I'm like the grandfather of it. I'm theoretically what people now call in Celtic Recon proto-Celtic Recon.
Okay.
they got real. What happened is back in the mid 70s, the craft tradition we were in, which of course it's kind of interesting. I did see your interview with Ian, and
cool.
The tradition didn't call itself Wicca until the late 70s because witchcraft traditions felt that were of some kind. We were what were called traditional witchcraft. So you had your Alexandrian Gardnerians, you had your trad witches,
right.
And basically they changed a lot of the terminology because Wicca wasn't as charged when you tell somebody, oh, I'm a witch, or I'm into witchcraft. So a lot of it changed during that late 70s, early 80s period.
Yeah.
And then we started getting picky about terminology. And also because Wicca became a sort of a catch-all term.
Yeah.
So everybody was doing Wicca. So a lot of people went back to using witchcraft, which we had in the last 20 years. We've had the resurgence of British traditional witchcraft.
Right. And I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like a lot of that is sort of because like we went from being more or less worried about being blamed for like random murders and like satanic panic stuff, because I feel like a lot of Wiccans went out of their way to say, hey, we don't do devil worship. We're not doing all that.
Back in the 60s and 70s and even into the 80s, you really had to explain to people that, because that's the first thing. If you were any kind of occultist, forget it. Forget if you were a witch or not. If you're any kind of occultist, they would basically say, oh, do you sacrifice babies?
And now we're like, I can't speak for everyone, but a lot of people are less worried about that. So
people would downplay if they had ritual sex. They would downplay if they used drugs. Basically, there were groups, and not everybody. A lot of people were pretty straight, but there were groups that used sex, drugs, and rock and roll. So.
As one does.
and basically it was because of the time. People, I knew people that lost their jobs, that had their children taken away from them. So it was a strange time. So a lot of people were underground. I mean, we were primarily an underground tradition. It took me 9 years almost. 9 years? Yeah, about 9 years. Well, actually less than that. So probably about 7 before I found anyone.
Wow.
I mean, I couldn't, and I was operating in Southern New England, in Rhode Island, because I'm originally from Providence, Rhode Island. And I basically used to do radio shows. I would do classes, and usually under the auspices of being an anthropologist.
Gotcha.
I'd go to the Unitarian Church and get roped in to do what I thought was solely going to be the a talk, and landed up, well, you have to do the service.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's fun.
So it wasn't that I was totally closeted, so everybody knew me.
Yeah.
Under one of my names, because I used different names in different circles. But yeah, it's been an interesting path. So anyhow, going back to Celtic Recon.
Yeah.
So what happens is this craft group I'm involved in has looked in the Book of Shadows that they were given.
Yeah.
And it's got Irish, Welsh, some Aradian material, some Luciferian material. It's a mishmash.
Yeah.
And they said, well, let's look at it and really direct it, because the magic in it was really kind of scattered, because and I do a paper, I've done a talk on this for pagan studies. A lot of American witches from the 60s were probably doing their own thing. And it was probably a mixture of folk magic and such. And then when the Gardnerians got here,
yeah,
they started trying to codify it, because if we don't do this, we won't look like witches. So they put on a magic system that most of them didn't understand. They just didn't understand it.
Yeah.
So when we got it, the first iteration in the early 70s, I should have actually been in the group, the first group back in 72 or 3, except that my friend Owen got initiated, and basically, as people that are neophytes do, we'll basically walk around and say, I've got the power. And I bumped into him on the street with another friend, and he told us he had the power and he could kill somebody, that guy across the street, with his mind if he wanted.
Oh boy.
And if that didn't work, he opens up, he used to wear sports coats, opens it up and pulls his athame out. Well, I'm at this point seeing it as a dagger that he's going to go over. And I go, he's part of a cult, because there were a lot of cults around. I mean, it was the time period, we had the Krishnas, we had the Church of the Process, there were Satanist groups up on the east side of Providence. There was a Cthulhu cult.
Oh Lord, okay.
Yeah, I mean, it was an interesting place, so I didn't get involved at that point. And to be honest, I was actually doing a lot more of my own work, because I originally got into ceremonial magic when I was about 16, 17. And I did that primarily because I needed to figure out how to close off the visions and the voices.
Yeah, for like,
because I had already been taken to, my parents had taken me to this psychiatrist and that psychiatrist, and they were like, it seems to be fine, but. And so I used ceremonial magic as a process. And then when I got into, when I was studying anthropology, my academic advisor decided that I was an American shaman.
Wow.
That if shamanism occurs in all cultures, that this is what I was doing, because the images I was seeing were American, not Greek, not Celtic, not, they were based on our culture. So. But anyway, I digress.
As one does.
As I do. Yeah. So anyhow, what happened is they decided on going Irish. And part of the reason we decided on going Irish was that the Providence Public Library had a special collection called the Williams Collection, which had every Celtic book that was ever written. Wow. Novels, poems, in different languages. And it was in like this big vault. The room was climate controlled in a big vault, and you could only go certain times of the day, and you could only use a pencil. Yeah. And so because we were broken up into originally covens, and then they became groves. We called them groves. Mm-hmm. The grove I was in we were kind of the academics of the group. So we were the ones that landed up going to the Williams collection. Myself with an anthro background, my magical partner for many years, Gweth, had an art history background, so we went in there and we cobbled together what we could of what was known at the time. So in a sense, we couldn't figure out if we were Celtic revivalists or Reconstructionists. So it got bantered around, but we never really codified it. Yeah. And it was still this mishmash of Celticism and witchcraft. And basically, by the early 80s, I had been doing a lot of research with my magical partner. The two of us, we had done a lot of work with Celtic deities, with Irish deities. And what happened was what the group rejected, because they were like, oh, we don't want to do that, you know. I remember one of the priestesses telling us, oh, that, you know, that I don't want to do that. We don't want any Morrigan stuff. She's too scary. And so we kept all of that stuff close to us, figuring once we got out, we would do our own thing with it. And what was interesting, because of that early part, like I was talking about, of you know, the traditions, how they grafted magic on, the couple that first got the tradition from our craft grandmother, from the woman we got it from, he was a ceremonial magician. So he put in a whole track of Crowley and the OTO and the Golden Dawn type magic. So in order to get through your degree work, you had to learn, you know, how to do magic, you know, which is always good training, because it gives you an idea of how closed systems work. Systems that, you know, like an elemental system has 4 elements, or 5, depending on how you look at it.
Yeah.
You know, planetary has 7, you know, tarot is 78, you know, it gives you something to work with, and you start understanding how systems work in magic.
Just to real quick, just to ask you real quick, this is, and I said this to you over text, that a lot of people in this like hyper online discussion, I'll just leave it, calling it at that. They don't have like a clear understanding of what closed system means. Can you just define real quick what closed system is for other people? Well,
it basically is a system that it has parameters.
Got it.
You know, that this is the way a circle is cast. Mm-hmm. And the reason that you're doing it this way is it has a tradition. It goes back at least to the Middle Ages or the Renaissance. Yeah. You know, that there is a current, it gets into what we call magical currents. Mm-hmm. So you can then tie into the magical current. Yeah. And that helps you along, like our training, when we would literally throw people into the circle and not tell them what was going on. And after a couple of months, you know, they could read it in the book, what was there, because even as a craft tradition, the Book of Shadows is ultimately worthless, because it's only keys. And the rest of it's oral and experiential. You have to work with it and talk to people that have done it before. So, so it's a valuable thing, which is why later on we started saying we were a mystery school. We weren't a craft tradition anymore. We were either Reconstruction or revivalists of, you know, Celtic, something that nobody knows what really happened. You know, this is all our best guess based on what we're working with and what we're reading. Yeah. So anyhow, in the early 80s, at some of the East Coast and Midwest festivals, like Rites of Spring back in New England, and in Pagan Spirit Gathering and Pan-Pagan out in the Midwest, I started giving talks on how if you're going to do anything Celtic, you know, don't go and pick up some crap book. Go to the primary sources. Yeah. And the first lecture I gave on it, I talked for 20 minutes, and my partner, turns to me and said, "Tagh, they have no idea what you've been talking about."
Oh no.
And this was like the creme de la creme of pagandom at that time. Ooh. You know, people that had been around and she asked, did people know? And so, of course, the only people that put their hands up that were following were like Ian and his wife, Moira, you know, because we're ultimately in the same tradition. And one other person who was a Celtic scholar who, at the end of the weekend, presented me with all her papers.
Oh, Lord.
Yeah, she
Okay.
basically said, well, she was getting more into the feminist craft type stuff. And so she just said, I'm just going to give these to you.
Wow.
And it's all dated now. I mean, you look at it, but it's interesting as an artifact of the time.
Yeah, it's history.
Um, and so I basically would go through and I would tell, like, because I would tell a story or mention a story, and people didn't know anything about the story because I just assumed everybody read this stuff.
I had to stop. I mean, granted, it's okay. So we had a very, in my opinion, awesome text conversation recently where you very succinctly said that, just in terms of the pagan subculture, whatever, it's just de-evolved.
Yeah.
And so I have never been able, like, and this is not me talking shit on anyone. There's great people out there. However, I can never assume anyone knows what I'm referencing, even in terms of pagan history from 5 years ago.
Yeah.
It's not, there is no, and I'm getting ahead of myself, but there is no coven structure anymore. There's no training. People just like decide to start calling themselves a witch. And, like, yeah, when there aren't options, you have to. I'm not against that, but you should get to, this is part of why I'm so drawn to, the practice of modern druidry, is because there is that emphasis on, hey, scholarship, know the lore, know your history. And it's just bewildering to me when it's like, you can't even tell me what happened like 10 years ago. Like, what, we don't have a long history in this country. Like the 70s, it's not that long ago.
No. I mean, yeah, and I've actually done, like I said, for some of the Pagan Studies Conference, I've done histories going back to, we've had stuff going on in this country, really, to like that we can actually pinpoint to 1693. Where we know a group of German mystics come over because the 30-year war is going on, and they come over and they settle in Ephrata, Pennsylvania, and they build an observatory, and they really are, they're German mystics, but they are Christian. But at that time, that was their only framework. And so I basically have this timeline where I show all these ideas that come here that opened up things for us now. Elizabeth, my wife, and for those that don't know, because I know you do, we've done like tag team teaching on this, and we did it at one conference, and everybody wanted us to write a book so they could teach it in their religion classes.
We need
and maybe
it.
we will one day. It's still on back burner, because and part of it is we feel that we are the inheritors of cultural creatives. People that came before us that were creative. It doesn't matter if somebody like Gardner or Ross Nichols with Druidry created it whole hog. It doesn't matter. They started something that was meaningful for people and that worked. It's interesting during boy, I haven't got to finish. Let me go back to Celtic Reconstruction. We'll never get through it. So anyhow, I'm giving these talks about 1983. Isaac Bonowitz corners me at Judy Harrow's apartment in New York and wants me to help him create this idea of a Druid order. And he didn't have the name. And within a year, I was at the summer solstice event that they did, the big one that was the beginning of ADF. And it was long, it was hot. We were in the midst of the sun. And, I can respect what they were doing, but I told him, I said, it's one of the reasons why I left the Catholic Church, and I left on good, grounds. I mean, but I
were
said,
they still using the binders back then?
Huh?
Were they still using the binders back then?
Oh yeah.
Oh, so that's just
it was funny. There was this big circle, and there was an altar in one end of it with Isaac and Silver Twig or Silverleaf, who was his second in command at the time, standing behind it. and just going like a Catholic priest, da, 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 da. And I was just like, and then he would say something in Gaelic and the other person would translate it, and somebody played a harp, and we just stood there.
Yeah.
And you know, and I know that when Ian started going into ADF, he did a lot of their ritual format, and he really did evolve it quite a bit.
He really, it's hard to overstate. Like when I was speaking to him, I didn't want to fangirl too hard, but it is hard to overstate how much he contributed to that whole tradition. And for those who, you know, have listened to my podcast a couple of times, we are talking about Anrias Fain, which is the Druid fellowship that I'm still a part of. I'm just ADF, associated as a solitary. Yeah. I'm like,
no, as a matter of fact, when he was back when we were together back in Rhode Island, quite a few things happened. I mean, we created a group because he was in one grove, and Gweth and myself were in another, and Moira were in another. And we created a group called the Providence Random Assembly. And what we did is we kind of brought paganism to Rhode Island. Like there were groups and people that were starting to get into it because we were like one of the only games in town, our tradition. Yeah. And we had already gone out, and we had started at Rites of Spring. We met people from New England, etc. Went to the Midwest, and started meeting people all over the country. And one of the things we did is we started bringing people to Rhode Island. And so we brought in Selena Fox and her partner at the time, Jim Allen. We got a ton of people to come. We hosted Robert Anton Wilson.
Damn.
And which was an interesting 2 days hanging out with Bob Wilson with RAW. Yes. So anyway, so after this thing with Isaac, so then I had been doing this talk that originally started out called Towards a Celtic Shamanism. Mm-hmm. And the reason I called it that was because back in 1980, I had been at Pan Pagan 80 when Gwydion Pendarwin was going to do his fairy shaman circle. And basically it was based on his work of how to enter faery. Now he also lived in Northern California out in the woods and could take his time to do it. He had 3 hours.
Wow.
So what they did was he had specially synthesized acid. And he interviewed 20 people. Gweth and myself interviewed with him, but we decided we didn't want to do it. But we were going to, so we were his warders. So we basically made sure everybody had water, that they weren't sitting in the sun, that they weren't doing something dangerous, like when one of the people, quote, transformed into a dolphin and jumped into the lake, and we went after them. But we had some good, I had some good talks with him because of my background, in my, in shamanism from anthropology. And I mean it in its wider sense, not even in the modern sense, because I did know Michael Harner. I did get to meet Michael Harner in 73, and I was introduced to him as the department shaman, and he didn't say anything. So, part of me is like, how much did you concoct? Right. I have problems with core shamanism. I mean, I know some people get something out of it, but it's not shamanism. It's to me, you've got to go to the other world. It's a magical technology that works with the other world and brings things back, not for yourself, but for other people.
That's kind of something that I feel like is, for one, that's in my mind, at least the core definition of it. But people have been getting better at talking about like these fake shamanic schools, like, you pay for a weekend for the title. The thing is though, like, you can cultivate learning shamanic techniques, and not necessarily,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So anyhow, after, and so Gwyddy and myself talked, and one of the things I said to him was, I said, well, we can do this without drugs. And he said, oh yeah. And we both agreed that it takes 3 days and 3 nights, which if you read the old stories of, you sit on the she-mount for 3 days and 3 nights and you fast, or you're in a cave in the dark, but you fast, you've got somebody maybe guarding you to make sure you're not interfered with. And at 3 days, the she will open, so, we talked about that. And so I decided, since it was now in people's minds, I would look at it and say, well, what are the quote shamanic elements in among the Celts? Because most Europeans have pieces of it. In northern Italy there's some, and to be honest, the witch trials in the the Middle Ages, all the stuff written down is pure shamanic stuff. You put the flying ointment on, you go up the tunnel or the chimney, you fly to the Sabbath with your animal. You dance with your power animal, it's all this activity. So there's a lot in the old documents. Anyhow, so I gave this talk, and from that, a lot of people went back home and kept talking about it. And some of these people eventually codified what became Celtic Reconstruction within the next 5 years.
Got it.
So like, and it was, and the term Celtic Recon specifically was coined by, I think, Kim Lambert, and I believe she was there with Catherine Price and Sego Ramos, who used to be aide, who's written a book called Celtic Fire. And there were a few other people, but they really codified it and along with my good friends, Erin Laurie, and at the time her husband, Gordon Cooper, who were up in Seattle. And they were calling me constantly, saying, we're doing this. What do you think of this? And would run things by. And sometimes I wouldn't tell them what I was doing because I wanted to see if we were coming to the same conclusions. And sometimes we were. And sometimes, we differentiated, we're different people. But Erin and Gordon set a lot of it together, and a lot of it was in the early bulletin boards on Genie, I think it was, back in the 90s, early 90s. And now I couldn't get on because while I was using computers for my job, all our computers were proprietary, because I was, because I'm a private investigator in my normal life.
No kidding.
And, we had all these high level computers that did phenomenal things, but I couldn't go on some bulletin board because there was a record of it somewhere. And I didn't get my own computer until almost the late 90s. So, so they were constantly saying, you've got to come on, Tagh, because I was in contact with a druid he later never really called himself a druid. A gent up in Canada who went by the moniker of Sean O'Twahill. And Sean had some really phenomenal stuff that he was coming up with. And he, of course, spoke Irish, spoke Welsh, he knew the languages. He went over, and he was Canadian. And Sean couldn't come into the United States because I said, maybe we'll meet. And he couldn't come in because he was a gay activist And so he was on a watch list,
Wow.
as an enemy of the United States or some such. I don't know. We lost track. I lost track of him. And people were saying, oh, he's on here, and everything was wonderful. But Sean could get touchy if you said the wrong thing. He would be like, just, I'm out of here. And they were saying, you've got to come on and talk to him. I said, well, I can write him a letter. I said, or give him a phone call. But then from there, that's when Celtic Recon really took off. And there were a lot of groups. There was Henge of Keltria, there was Invas.
So like the 90s.
Yeah. And some of them are still around.
Sure.
It wasn't just the Druid or neo-Druidic groups like ADF and Obod, which had been around for quite a while. As a matter of fact, it was around that time, I think Obod was in hiatus for a while, because I think, and I might get this wrong, Ross Nichols, who was the one who really revived it from one of the old Druidic orders, might have died, and he had passed the info to Philip Cargam.
Right. Okay.
And Philip hadn't really started it up yet, but it might have been in the early 80s. It might have been around the same time. Yeah, it was kind of interesting. My friend Gordon became he was for a while, he was the archdruid of the Ancient Order of Druids in America.
Oh, wow.
Which had been around, another one of these old Druidic orders. But he also went over and lived in Gerald Gardner's cottage, because evidently the people in Obod or Philip owned it. And so they let him live there. And he was their archivist for a while. And he'd call me up at 2 a.m. our time, because it wasn't that time in Great Britain, and would say, I've got this letter here between Ross Nichols and Gerald Gardner, where Gardner is saying, well, I've got these 4 holidays, and I don't know if I should use the Celtic holidays or the equinox and solstices. And Ross says, oh, let's just use all of them.
And so that's how the wheel of the year happened.
Of why we have these 8 holidays, because, in our system, for instance, we'll do stuff at the equinox and solstices, but, it's the 4 greater Sabbats, what used to be called the greater Sabbats, of Imbolg and, Beltana and Samhain and Lunasa, because it's why the holidays duplicate each other. You've got a little bit of this one and a little bit of that one in the cross quarter. And it's like, okay, why has that happened? So, yeah, so that kind of is, and then they kind of took off, and I kind of pulled out after a while of really talking to anybody about Celtic Reconstruction, because people were getting to be like, if it's not in a book, how can you do it? It's, unverified personal gnosis. And I'm thinking to myself, it's all unverified personal gnosis.
Right? At a certain
I said,
point.
Christianity is unverified personal gnosis. If this guy was walking around in ancient Judea, either snacking on mushrooms or hanging out in caves or was part of a sect of Essenes, it was his personal gnosis that started that train that took over and co-opted, Western civilization for 2,000 years.
Exactly.
And so it's all unverified, and I guess, so then somebody said, well, verified is when more than one person gets it. And I said, well, I can see that. I said, but, and so, in my own experience, we use a lot of different things, but, when I was doing the class, going back to that, I was trying to get people to go to primary sources.
Yeah.
So like, go to the old stories. If you can read them in Old Irish or in Old Welsh, read them that way, because I find, and, I can kind of read it, but I have like the dictionary of the Irish language, which is about this big. Now it's online, but I've got the original that looks like the OED, the Oxford English Dictionary. So it's got these little pages that you need to look at with magnifying glass, and it's got all these words, and where they were, came from, and how they're defined in its different periods, and the words are defined different. Modern Irish has gone through become modern Irish from a lot of permutations. And to be honest, the people that we probably would really have more of a headspace with probably didn't speak Old Irish, because Old Irish comes in when Christianity comes in around around the 5th century. And before that, they're talking something that's called primitive Irish, which is more like some kind of Proto-Celtic language. And so and then of course, Old Irish changes when the Normans comes in, and actually around the 9th century, we get Middle Irish, and then we get early modern and modern. And then it's a mess after that, because you've got regional dialects, from the 4 parts. You've got Northern and Southern dialects that are different. It's where we get the V sound and the silent sound with the MH. If you see MH in the middle of Irish words, and then of course in 1945, the language got codified by the Christian Brothers. So it's like,
the first time I heard you say Sovereign, when I just gotten around to calling it Samhain, I was just like, I give up. Like, I don't give up, but I'm just like, it's
they're equally, and it could be Sovereign, and because in one of them, and I'm going to forget if it's Northern or Southern, the MH in the center is silent. And when it's silent, you've got the W sound.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'll take your word for it.
Yeah. And I checked it out with somebody finally, because I started actually talking to people that were Celtic scholars and linguistic people. So they said, there's a lot of sounds we can't make anymore. We've forgotten how to make them.
Wow.
So I always get somebody that comes up, we do a talk on the Ogham, and somebody will go, oh, it's Ohm. Well, in modern Irish, it's Ohm. But in Old Irish, it's got a hard G, so Brigid is, for us, Brigid is the goddess Bridget or Breed.
Yeah. So, I've heard all 3 of them.
Yeah. And they're all correct. I mean, it's just, it's pick and choose. As we used to say, if you're in a group, make sure everybody, has the same dialect, the same lingua franca. We're all saying the same thing and we know what it means.
Just, when I'm like not really sure how to pronounce something, I'll just try and see if I can translate what the title actually means and just say that.
Yeah.
Because I only caught wind that like Monanon is Wananon or something like not that long ago. And I'm like, I'm just going to say Lord of the Waves. Like, he knows I'm talking to him. Like, I will just say what you are.
Well, and really all the god names are titles. They're all titles.
Right. So just break
them down.
Yeah.
And to be honest, I'm working, I've got a tome that I'm working with it's like 600-700 pages. And it's basically breakdowns of all the Indo-European languages and the Celts and Celtic names. Wow. And you can actually see where some of the names and how the god forms, so to speak, really are related somehow, it's kind of an interesting thing, to see it. Now, one of the things we find also in Ireland too, is because, it wasn't Romanized.
Yeah.
The Romans didn't come and conquer it. And as a matter of fact, Ian said this the other day, so I'm not going to repeat a lot of it. But the things we have to remember is it wasn't in a vacuum.
Right.
They did write stuff in Greek because Greek was the trading language, because they used to go up to trade with the Irish. They used to get tin. The Roman Empire got tin from them. And the Phoenicians and, several other, we're not sure, we're pretty sure the Phoenicians got there. But the trading language was Greek.
Okay.
So that's what they would keep tablets of in Greek. There is up on the eastern coast towards the north, there is a settlement that was actually an outpost where the Romans would come and trade with them.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the Romans were scared terribly of the Irish, and it's why on the west coast of Great Britain there are all these forts so that the barbarians across the way wouldn't attack them.
Okay.
And but you know, for instance, at New Grange, when they've dug up, you know, at the front of the entranceway, we find Roman coins that were probably left as offerings.
Gotcha.
You know, I mean, we find Chinese silk. You know, I mean, they were trading.
There's trade.
You know, and you know, and the Celts in general, you know, moved around. I mean, the fact that in Turkey we have, you know, the Galatians that everybody knows from the Bible, Paul's letter to the Galatians. The Galatians are a group of Celts that settled in Turkey that were mercenaries.
Wow.
They were a mercenary group,
Okay.
you know. And so, you know, they're widespread. I mean, they got around. They were probably also some of the Celtic mercenaries worked in Egypt. You know, it's like, you know, they get around. So they didn't live in a bubble, and we see that with early Irish. You know, as Ian points out, before Patrick gets there, there are already Christians there. Patrick goes there because there are Christians there. There are people for him to minister to.
Yeah. And it's just like, you know, it's one of those things that I don't have patience for anymore. Cause I'm like, I'm sorry, this priest is out here like beating people with his cane.
No,
like how's like, really?
No. If you ever read the Confessio, supposedly his words, it's boring. It's about how I met with this king and how I did this service. I mean, there's no magic, no mysticism. And second, and as I always tell people, when the snakes went Ireland, there were no snakes in Ireland. They never got there because the island was cut off early enough after the Ice Age that no poisonous plants or animals made their way. Now there are snakes there today because they came over, like garter snakes came over in ships, but there were no, historically there are no, and we archaeologically, you know, there's like no poison oak and poison ivy. There's no mistletoe in Ireland.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay.
So mistletoe doesn't figure in. You know, everybody is like, oh,
mistletoe and druids. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it doesn't figure in. We don't use mistletoe at all. So what happened is Ireland doesn't become really a Christian country until the Normans get there.
Right. Okay.
And the Normans are given Ireland by the Pope because Celtic Christianity is in competition with Roman Christianity. And, you know, it's basically convert, or, you know, it's the Normans that come in and make everybody convert, so to speak. You know, and that really is not a conversion. It's that you're going to do it our way. Yes. And one of the things that they had was this crazed thing about how to calculate Easter was one of them.
I feel like I remember something about that.
Yeah. It's crazy. But to be honest, when Christianity is starting up, if one of the councils, I don't know if it was Nicaea or one of the, there is an argument between Augustine, who becomes a saint, and an Irish monk named Pelagius. And Pelagius basically wants to have a different take on Christianity, that the body is good, nature is good. You know, these things are good because in his mind, God created them. You know, the Christian God created them, so they have to be good. Whereas Augustine, it's like sin and it's evil and, you know, nature, and, you know. So it would have been a different, you know, tack if he had won that battle. Then again, you know, it would have been a different tack if in Gaul, Vercingetorix had defeated the Romans, you know, who basically, you know, he gets all the Celtic tribes united. And then, of course, when he's in what is essentially a fort or a town, but it's like a palisade, you know, they get starved out by the Romans because he's waiting for the other tribes to come and they kind of blow him off.
Yeah, he did give them a run for their money,
history. You know, it would have just changed history. You know, where Celtic countries wouldn't have had to deal with, you know, Roman domination.
Yeah. I think about it often.
Sorry,
Well,
I'm digressing.
no, it's I love it. Now,
Um,
let's see.
yeah, but but that was the other thing, and the other part of Celtic recon, besides going to primary sources and trying to learn the language, don't be a monoglot, be a polyglot. Learn, even if you can't speak it, learn some part of it that you can read it or understand it. And and unlike a lot of people, I don't believe you need to learn a Celtic language to speak to Celtic gods, because they're gods. Gods are spirits. Spirits, language is a symbol system. They understand symbol systems. It's like, it's how we communicate with any spirit, and so, but the other thing was what I was it was to get people to use critical thinking.
I'm still trying.
I mean, and I'm not saying because, as I get older, there are things that I realize that we've also kind of lost some of the romance of it, the beauty of this stuff, that should be, not just, everybody wants to be scary. And there's enough scary stuff in the other world.
It's so old. I'm so over it.
And it's like, one of my expertises until I moved out to California was H.P. Lovecraft.
Oh, no kidding.
Because, well, I lived in Providence. I grew up. I mean, when I was a kid, I used to go to the bookstore and knew this old guy, Dick, who used to sell him books in the 30s. Dick was ancient. Dick would look at us when we'd say, "So, did you know H.P. Lovecraft?" And he'd go, "Yeah, cold fish." But I was into Lovecraft scholarship. I used to give tours of Providence and take people around, and I got to sit at all his friends, like his best friend Frank Belknap Long. I sat at Frank's feet and listened to him talk.
Wow.
And literally I sat at his feet. There's no other place to sit. And I got to meet, and there were a lot of people that knew him that, like Robert Bloch and Fritz Leiber and, that wrote to him, so that I got to meet and actually talk one-on-one with. So, so I had a very different view of what was happening when everybody was running around freaking out about the Cthulhu cult.
Yeah, I bet.
So anyway, but those were that was the main thing. It was to get people to look at things and really, discern what's bullshit and what's not. I used to, but back in the 80s and 90s, Celtic books would come out all the time because it was the new thing.
Right.
And I had probably about 30 people at one point. Which is a funny story on how I got 30 students. I was doing this class called, there was a thing in the Valley, in the San Fernando Valley, called Seeker Circle. And the whole idea behind it was that instead of having people just find a group and get involved and then leave the group, to have them get introduced to different groups. Smart. And you would make a deal with yourself and the gods. It wasn't even the people running it. That you would listen to 3 teachers and then make up your mind. And so I did a thing, and somebody once finally told me, and they said, "Oh, you really got us. We all knew we were going to leave at the end of your session." I said, "Yeah, you all guys all landed up at my front door, 1 or 2 at a time." And I mean, the core group was about 12 people, but then we could have like big classes or rituals up to 30. And I was talking about Celtic gods, and I kept not talking about the Morrigan, because she's the matron of our craft group. And everybody was waiting for me, and this crow came down, and they knew I was And every time I would say something else, it would start making noise. And I was like, oh God, it's a stupid crow imitating me talking. And I said, okay. I said, you guys want to talk about this? And I said, we'll talk about my favorite goddess, the Morrigan. And when I did this, 3 crows flew over my head in formation.
How much do you need?
I was like, and I said, I couldn't have, so, and so, yeah, that's, but, so I've got a whole bunch of, like, I've got non-initiates and initiates all over the place. They never last. Some people stay for a while, but, nobody ever gets through to get everything. So, and part of it is like, my last group, we broke up primarily because of the recession. Like everybody moved to different parts of either California or the country. Everybody needed, find work and such. So you can't blame people. But yeah. So, but on. So I don't know what we're doing time wise.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's probably going to cut us off any minute now.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Thank you so much for this. I will try and maybe snag you another time to talk more just about the Morrigan and like modern practice and whatnot.
Sure, that or just on some of the magical stuff.
Yeah, I would love to.
Because I've done a lot of my personal work for, like, going back, has been with spirit.
For sure.
Whether you call them gods or she or I mean, I've had a spirit, I've had a Leon Chi, I've had a spirit spouse since I'm trying to remember, like probably like in the 70s, but I didn't recognize it until the early 80s. But but then again, that's part of the shamanic complex too.
Right.
So,
yeah. Well, where
so,
can I direct people towards where can people find you or any of your work if you wish to be found?
Well, anything I've written is probably long out of print. It's been it's magazines that were published back in the 70s and 80s. So
we need the book.
Yeah, I mean, I am working on a book.
Okay.
I'm working on a couple of books. So
okay,
I'm working on a sort of a primer and such. So
yeah, because I looked to you, Ian, and there's an author, Luke Eastwood, who I also enjoy. And obviously there's other good ones. I'm horrendous because I haven't gotten to Blood and Mistletoe yet. That's my sin. I haven't read Hutton.
I like Hutton, but to be honest, his expertise is Cromwellian England. Yeah,
that's where I'm like,
he does good, his without telling stories, I hope, his drawing, his Triumph of the Moon works because he's a craft initiate as well as being a druid. So he's got some inside track. It's like when I'll so he does have an inside track. I'm hoping that's not, I think people know that, but he might deny it because I saw some thing where he's, doing a thing on witchcraft and he's like, oh, I don't know any of this stuff.
I'm sorry. Who are you kidding at this point? At this point in the game, we're going to do that, whatever.
Who another person, if you can get hold of the book, that was, and is an interesting read. He's got a different take on it, is Alexei Kondratyev. Yeah, and
I've heard of this guy. Yeah,
he's basically the Apple Branch was the name of the book.
Yeah,
and Alexei passed away. I knew him when him and his partner, Blue Lotus, Lenny. As a matter of fact, Lenny helped me buy a drum when I was in New York.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
So yeah.
Well,
but anyway,
I will have your name for people to, I don't know if I can find any of your stuff. I will link it in the show notes.
And I mean, if you want, you can post my email. I will talk to people via email or via Facebook or whatever.
Okay.
You can messenger me. So
that is very kind of you. I very much appreciate you and your time. I will grab some more of it another day. Well, it's my pleasure.
Okay.
Trying to make Druidry great again. Thank you for listening to or watching that episode, and or maybe both. I did want to share that although Tagh does not have much by way of his material on the internet, I think there's like one magazine article that I managed to find. He very graciously offered that people can correspond with him if they wish on Facebook or via email at Tagh, T-A-G-H, at att.net. Be on your best behavior. That should go without saying. Don't be weirdos. Be graceful. That is all I am going to say. And of course, you can also look into the Pagan History Project on Facebook as well. As for me, support of the shenanigans is very much appreciated via my Patreon, Outlaw Priestess, because shenanigating is a lot of energy. So anyways, now is that time where I tell you thank you so much again for listening. I appreciate you, but close your laptop, turn off your phone, stop looking at whatever screen you're on, get outside, and go do some magic.
It doesn't matter if somebody like Gardner or Ross Nichols with Druid